Number 7. Sharon Carr. On a warm summer night in June 1992, Katie Ratcliffe was on her way home from a nightclub in Camberley, England. She was an 18-year-old hairdresser, hardly even an adult yet. She had a bright future ahead of her, until that fateful evening. As she made her way back home, Katie was ambushed in the dark. In what seemed like a completely random attack, she was stabbed more than 30 times. Her murder was utterly horrific, and the cops were clueless as to who was responsible. The case went unsolved for 2 years. The nation was shocked when the cops finally realized Katie's killer had been a 12-year-old girl, the seemingly innocent Sharon Carr. Sharon was born in 1979 in Belize, but her family moved to Camberley in 1986. She had 3 siblings from 3 different fathers. She was raised by her mom and stepfather in extreme poverty. Her home life was something out of a horror movie. Her mother was extremely abusive, once hospitalizing her husband when she poured boiling fat over him. Even with such a life at home, Sharon was described by her teachers as polite and helpful. She was a socially active child who was slightly troubled but not particularly evil. She did like attention and was known for disrupting class, but she didn't seem like she could be a killer. Oh, how wrong everyone was. After Sharon brutalized Katie Ratcliffe in 1992, she took a break from murder. Then in June 1994, Sharon stabbed one of her classmates. It was a vicious stabbing that saw Sharon's victim receive a punctured lung. She barely survived, saved at the last second by 5 students who entered the toilets when the attack was taking place. In an interview afterward, the victim claimed Sharon looked like she was enjoying the attack. When Sharon was arrested, she admitted to a string of other attacks. One of them was Katie's murder. But Sharon, the innocent-looking child, also admitted to a series of savage assaults on animals, a clear sign of a psychotic mind. She wouldn't be convicted of Katie's murder until 1997. She was given life in prison with a minimum of 14 years. But because of her continued violent behavior in jail, Sharon Carr remains behind bars. Number 6. Andrew Q Nann. Andrew Q Nann was the youngest of 4 children, born in California in 1969. His life was cushiony, to say the least. His father served in the Vietnam War and then worked as a stockbroker. Andrew went to school in the affluent area of La Jolla in San Diego. Those who knew him in school remembered Andrew best for his brilliant mind. He was smart, talkative, and had a genius IQ of 147. Although he was a genius, he was troubled. As a teen, he developed a reputation as a liar. He also came out as gay and began to have affairs with significantly older men. Still, he wasn't that unusual of a guy. He was a bright young man who nobody imagined would grow up to be a serial killer. Then again, there were a few red flags. Andrew once dislocated his mother's shoulder by throwing her against a wall. This was following an argument after the revelation of his sexual orientation. Andrew moved to San Francisco, and that was when he started to look a lot like a serial killer. He and his older gentleman callers would make violent adult videos together, what are known as snuff films. In 1990, Andrew met fashion designer Gianni Versace, though the Versace family has always maintained that the 2 men never met. 7 years later, Andrew killed Versace. But first he killed 4 different men. In 1997, Andrew snapped. It's believed he discovered that he was HIV positive and went on a random murder spree. It started on April 26th in Minneapolis. Andrew beat his friend Jeffrey Allen to death with a hammer in front of his other friend David Madsen. For the next few days, Andrew and David were seen several times hanging out in Minneapolis. They were spotted together in David's Jeep and having lunch at a bar. Then David Madsen was found dead from a gunshot wound to the back of his head. His body had been dumped near Rush Lake. On May 3rd, Andrew killed a prominent real estate developer named Lee Albert Miglin in Chicago. Andrew wrapped Lee with duct tape and then stabbed him over 20 times with a screwdriver before turning on him with a hacksaw. 6 days later, Andrew turned up in New Jersey and shot a cemetery caretaker named William Reese for seemingly no reason at all. From New Jersey, Andrew traveled to Miami Beach. On July 15th, he murdered Giovanni Versace on the steps of his mansion. 1 week later, Andrew was found dead in a luxury houseboat. The murders were never explained with a proper motive. Andrew was a seemingly normal genius who suddenly developed a taste for snuff films and brutal murder. And now for number 5. But first, it's shout-out time. I wanted to give a big thank you to HighSoul5039 and Papergirl for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like this. Number 5. Jasmine Richardson. One of the most gruesome killings in Canadian history took place in April 2006. The murderer was Jasmine Richardson. She was the youngest person in Canadian history to be convicted of multiple murder counts. She was responsible for taking out her entire family. But guess what? Jasmine is currently free as a bird. In 2016, she was released. It all started when Jasmine Richardson met a young man named Jeremy Steinck at a punk rock show. Jasmine was 12 and Jeremy was 23. Jasmine was a seemingly normal young girl into punk rock music and the goth scene. Jeremy suffered from mental problems. At a young age, he started to get weird. He wore a vial of blood around his neck and told people he was a 300-year-old werewolf. He couldn't get a girlfriend his own age, so he went after a child. Together, they hatched a plan to get rid of Jasmine's parents. Her parents were extremely upset about the relationship and wanted it to end. According to the police reports, Jasmine was the one who first suggested murder. On April 23, 2006, the Richardson household in Medicine Hat became the site of a massacre. Mark Richardson, Deborah Richardson, and Jasmine's 8-year-old brother were discovered dead in the house. At first, Jasmine wasn't even a suspect. Inspector Brent Secondiak was one of the first to arrive on the scene. He said that initially Jasmine being the killer wasn't even in the realm of possibility. During the investigation, police pieced together what happened very slowly. Deborah had been killed first, stabbed around a dozen times. Mark fought back, but ultimately lost. It was only when the police looked in Jasmine's room that they found digital evidence of her plan. She and her boyfriend had been exchanging disturbing emails about what they were going to do. In 2008, Jeremy was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was given life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years. Jasmine was also found guilty. But Canadian laws are a lot different than American laws. The maximum sentence for a youth her age was 6 years in jail and 4 years of community supervision. She was released in 2016 and has been free ever since. Number 4. Robert Kums. In the late 19th century, Robert Kums killed a person in Victorian England. There were a lot of people committing murders back then, but Robert was unique in that he was only 13 years old. Robert was the son of a steward on a transatlantic steamer. He had a brother and his life was hard. Because Robert had been pulled from his mother with forceps at birth, he had visible markings on the sides of his head. At the age of 3, he started to suffer from migraines. The doctor advised that he should never be hit on the head, or it could cause serious problems. As Robert grew older, the doctor started to prescribe him sedatives for his headaches. When Robert was 6, Jack the Ripper terrorized Whitechapel and was never caught. It's believed the boy may have become fascinated with Jack and his terrible killings, but it wouldn't have been that weird for the time, as Jack the Ripper was sensationalized throughout all of England. On July 6th, Robert used all the money he had to purchase a kitchen knife. The next night, he plunged that knife into his mother's heart at 3:45 a.m. Then he crawled into bed beside her and fell asleep. When he woke up in the morning, she wasn't dead. She was lying beside him, making horrible groaning noises. Robert left the house with his brother Nathaniel and came back with some quick lime to cover up the smell of his mom's decomposition, who by that time had perished. For the next 10 days, Robert used the money he stole from his dead mom to have fun around town. But after 10 days, his aunt showed up at the house and found the body still lying in bed. Robert was sent to prison on July 18th and was moved into a padded cell because he was completely insane. Number 3. Britney Martinez. Britney Martinez seemed like a loving and devoted wife to a firefighter in Houston, Texas. In 2012, the supposedly devoted wife appeared before a judge on charges of solicitation of capital murder. She was arrested in March following a botched plot to have her husband assassinated. According to court records, Britney gave a friend $1,000 to kill Adrian Martinez. With $1,000 was included a picture of Adrian and a copy of his work schedule. Britney believed the items would be passed along by a mutual friend to a hitman. It all started a few months earlier in January. Britney, mother of two and former EMT, approached her friend about her marital problems. Her friend was a manager at a restaurant in North Houston called Casa Olé. As Britney confided her marital woes, she admitted that she wanted her husband dead. Britney collected $500 in cash and gave it to the manager of the restaurant as a down payment for the hit. She promised to give another $1,000 or $2,000 after the job was done. Britney said she didn't want to have any contact with the hitman, but she definitely wanted the job complete. While Britney was waiting for the murder to take place, she continued playing the role of a happy wife. She even blogged about how wildly in love she was with her husband. In late February, she blogged about their plan to renew their vows. She claimed to be excited about their upcoming anniversary when in reality she was waiting for the hitman to strike. Shortly after she made a blog post about her amazing husband, saying, "What a guy," Britney reached out to her friend. She was anxious to have her husband killed as soon as possible. She complained that the hit was taking too long, so she dropped off more money to hasten the deal. Britney also gave updated information about Adrian's work schedule and notes on where the cameras were around his job. What Britney didn't realize was that her friend was recording the conversation to give to the police. Britney was promptly arrested and is facing life in prison for trying to axe her partner. And it's all on tape. Number 2. Carla Hamula. Between 1990 and 1992, Carla Hamula helped her husband brutalize and murder at least 3 victims. She's known as the Barbie Killer because Carla Hamula did not look like a murderer. She looked like a perfectly ordinary veterinary technician, maybe slightly more attractive than the average person. But underneath the Barbie veneer was a psychopath. In December 1990, Carla stole a vial of sedatives from the veterinary office where she worked. During a dinner party hosted by her family, she drugged her sister, who was only 15 years old. Then she dragged her sister into the basement and presented the teenager to her boyfriend Paul as a sacrifice. Things only got darker from there. Carla and Paul went on a torture spree in the area around Toronto, Canada, for 2 long years. By the time their crimes were discovered, they'd killed several teenagers. The cops only pinned 3 deaths on the couple, but it's believed they may have successfully gotten away with far more. Because Carla and Paul looked like such an ordinary couple and were both prom royalty material, they became known as the Ken and Barbie Killers. Just like Jasmine Richardson, Carla got away with an extremely lenient sentence. Carla, although directly responsible for the murders, was never arrested. She turned herself in and snitched on her boyfriend. She painted herself as an unwilling victim and was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but she was eligible for parole after only 3 years. Carla's deal is still spoken of today in Canada as the worst plea deal in the country's history. Paul was denied bail in 2018 and will likely never get out of prison, but Carla got out in 2005. She remarried and moved to Quebec as if nothing ever happened. Number 1. James Archini. James Archini was the youngest person ever sentenced to death and then executed for the crime. James was hanged by the US federal government in Arkansas for his role in a robbery and murder that he committed when he was only 10 years old. In 1872, James and his friend William Parchmeal were traveling near Fort Gibson in Oklahoma. At the same time, a Swedish laborer by the name of Henry Feigl was moving from Tahlequah to Fort Gibson. When the two parties met about 2 miles out from the town, James attacked the Swedish man and bludgeoned him to death with a rock. Just imagine being a grown adult traveling through the early American countryside and being attacked by a tiny child. Out of all the things you would expect to die from, a 10-year-old with a rock probably wasn't high on the list. After the murder, James stole 25 cents from the Swedish man's pockets and his boots. There was a brief investigation, but the kid was only 10 and didn't really seem like a murderer. The investigation went away, but not forever. 13 years later, U.S. Deputy Marshal Andrews learned of the case and became interested. He uncovered evidence that established James's guilt. The next year, James was tracked down, along with his friend William, and taken to Fort Smith in Arkansas. Both young men were found guilty of murder. On June 26, 1885, James Arini was hanged for a crime he committed when he was 10. His friend William Parchmeal was hanged beside him for his role as an accessory in the robbery. Which of these demented killers do you think looked the least like a crazed murderer? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and come back soon for more awesome videos from the channel. Bye.